Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee when the universe decided to have a laugh at his expense. The deep space exploration vessel New Horizon had been testing their new faster-than-light drive in the quiet outer edges of the solar system when something went very wrong or very right depending on how you looked at it. One second they were floating peacefully near Neptune, and the next second they were surrounded by more alien ships than Jake had ever imagined could exist in one place. The bridge crew stared at the massive view screen showing what looked like the biggest traffic jam in galactic history. Hundreds of enormous alien vessels hung in perfect formation around them, like someone had built a city in space and forgotten to mention it to Earth. The ships were sleek and dangerous looking, with hull designs that seemed to shift and flow even while standing still. First Officer Lisa Rodriguez was the first person to break the stunned silence that had fallen over the bridge. She looked down at her console and then back up at Jake with the kind of expression people get when they realize they have accidentally walked into the wrong movie. "Captain, we are receiving what appears to be a surrender demand in about 20 different languages, and they keep adding more." Chief Engineer Pete Williams looked up from his engineering station, where warning lights were blinking in patterns that probably meant something important. He had the same calm expression he always wore, whether he was fixing a broken coffee machine or preventing the ship from exploding. "Well, that is certainly new. Should I start up the barbecue in case our new friends want to stay for dinner?" Navigator Amy Foster was busy trying to figure out where exactly they had ended up, and the results were not making her day any better. She ran her hands through her short brown hair and shook her head slowly. "Sir, according to these readings, we have jumped right into the middle of what looks like a Galactic Empire border checkpoint. Also, I think we accidentally crashed through their customs barrier and maybe destroyed some kind of scanning equipment." Jake rubbed his temples and tried to process what he was hearing. The alien message was still playing on repeat and had now reached its 30th language, which sounded like someone gargling marbles while singing opera. "Any idea what they want, Rodriguez?" Lisa adjusted her headset and listened for a moment before turning back to Jake with a slight grin. "Best I can tell, sir, they want us to prepare for immediate boarding and imprisonment for violating somewhere around 50 different galactic laws that apparently exist. They seem very upset about our driving." Jake looked around at his crew, who were all watching him with the kind of expectant expressions that suggested they thought he might have some brilliant plan hidden up his sleeve. Unfortunately, his sleeve was empty, except for a half-eaten energy bar and some lint. "Huh. Well, we cannot exactly back up and pretend this never happened. Williams, what is our status?" Pete checked his readings and nodded with satisfaction. "Drive is working perfectly now, sir. Whatever we hit seems to have actually improved our calibration. I think we might have accidentally discovered a new type of navigation beacon." Jake stood up and straightened his uniform, which had somehow gotten wrinkled just from sitting in his chair. "All right then, open a channel and let us see what these folks actually want. Maybe we can work something out." The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at what had to be the most intimidating alien Jake had ever seen, even though it was also the first alien he had ever seen. The creature had 4 arms and what looked like armor made from living metal that shifted colors as it moved. Its face was angular and sharp, with eyes that glowed like small suns and an expression that suggested it had been having a very bad day for several thousand years. The alien spoke in heavily accented but perfectly understandable English, and its voice sounded like distant thunder mixed with the growl of an angry bear. "Unknown vessel, you have violated the sovereign space of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. You will prepare to be boarded and processed according to Imperial Code 847 Alpha. Any resistance will result in immediate vaporization of your ship and everyone aboard it." Jake looked around at his crew again and saw that they were all still watching him with those expectant expressions. He thought about all the training he had received at the Space Academy and realized that none of it had covered what to do when you accidentally invaded a galactic empire. He decided to fall back on basic human politeness and see what happened. "Well, that seems like a pretty extreme response to what was basically a traffic accident. But sure, come on over and we will put some coffee on. Fair warning, though, our coffee is pretty strong and some people find it a bit intense." The alien commander looked like someone had just told him that gravity was optional, and the laws of physics were more like suggestions. His glowing eyes grew wider and he tilted his head to one side as if he was trying to process information that did not fit into any category his brain recognized. "You are inviting us aboard your vessel. For coffee." Jake shrugged and smiled the way he always did when life got weird, which was more often than most people would expect. "Sure, why not? We are obviously not going anywhere until we sort this whole thing out. And standing here glaring at each other through video screens seems like a waste of time. Besides, Amy makes excellent coffee and Pete usually has some kind of snacks lying around." The alien commander stared at them for a long moment, and Jake could practically see the gears turning in his head as he tried to figure out how to respond to a situation that had clearly never come up in Galactic Empire training. Finally, he seemed to reach some kind of decision, though his expression suggested he was not entirely sure it was a good one. "Very well, we will board your vessel. But know that this is merely a formality before we process you according to Imperial law." Jake nodded agreeably. "That sounds fine. We will see you soon." The screen went dark, and Jake turned to his crew, who were all looking at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. Lisa shook her head slowly and started preparing for their unexpected guests, while Pete headed off to check on the coffee situation. Amy went back to trying to figure out exactly where they were and how they had gotten there. Jake settled back into his captain chair and wondered if this was how most first contact situations went. Somehow he doubted it. 2 hours later, Jake found himself hosting what had to be the strangest dinner party in human history. The Zephyrian boarding party had arrived expecting to find a ship full of terrified primitives ready to beg for mercy. Instead, they discovered Chief Williams giving an enthusiastic tour of the engine room to a group of fascinated alien engineers, while Dr. Susan Clark was comparing medical techniques with their species physician and arguing about the best way to treat space sickness. The boarding party was led by Sub-Commander Krelthak, who had 4 arms like his commander but seemed younger and less sure of himself. He kept looking around the human ship with an expression that suggested he was trying to solve a puzzle that was missing half its pieces. The other aliens in his group were similarly confused, as they found themselves being treated more like welcome guests than dangerous invaders. "So you see, the funny thing about our quantum drive is that it does not actually follow most of the established rules of physics," Williams was explaining to a group of Zephyrian technicians who were hanging on his every word. "We think it works because humans are really bad at accepting that things cannot be done. When someone tells us something is impossible, we usually take that as a challenge." One of the alien engineers raised a tentacle that was covered in what looked like living circuits. "But how do you overcome the fundamental limitations of space-time distortion without proper containment protocols?" Williams grinned and patted the side of a humming machine that was held together with what appeared to be spare parts and determination. "Easy. We just ignore the limitations and build something that works anyway. If it explodes, we learn something new and try again." Meanwhile, in the ship mess hall, communications officer Tony Martinez had somehow gotten into a deep philosophical discussion with the boarding party cultural specialist about the nature of authority and social structure. The alien was a tall crystalline being named Shextar, whose body seemed to be made of living glass that changed colors when he was thinking hard. "But why do you simply do what the Empire tells you without question?" Martinez asked while passing around a plate of sandwiches that the aliens were examining with scientific curiosity. "Do you never want to try doing things differently or make your own decisions about what is right?" Shextar paused with a peanut butter and jelly sandwich halfway to his mouth, and his crystalline body shifted to a deep blue color that probably meant something significant. "It has never occurred to any of us to question the natural order of things. The Empire has existed for 12,000 of your years and maintained peace and stability across the galaxy." Martinez nodded thoughtfully while refilling coffee cups for the mixed group of humans and aliens sitting around the table. "Yeah, but just because something has been done the same way for a long time does not mean it is the right way or the best way. We have only been in space for about 60 years, and we question everything. It is kind of what we do." The concept seemed to cause some kind of short circuit in Shextar's brain, because his body started cycling through colors so fast it was making everyone dizzy. Several other aliens at the table were having similar reactions as they tried to process the idea that established authority might not be automatically correct. Sub-Commander Krelthak was having his own crisis in Captain Morrison's ready room, where Jake was treating him like an old friend, rather than a potentially hostile military officer. The alien kept shifting uncomfortably in his chair, as if he was not sure what he was supposed to do with the situation. You must understand, Captain Morrison, that your vessel has committed what the Empire considers to be acts of war against the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Your entire species should be preparing for immediate annihilation or unconditional surrender. Jake nodded thoughtfully while pouring coffee into 2 mugs and pushing one across the table to his guest. I can see how you might think that, and I am sorry we caused you trouble. But here is the thing: we did not actually mean to do any of this. We were just testing our new drive system and ended up here by accident. And honestly, if your empire is so fragile that one little ship can cause this much panic, maybe the real problem is not with us. Krelthak stared at him with all 4 of his glowing eyes wide with shock. Fragile? You think the Zephyrian Empire is fragile? Jake shrugged and took a sip of his coffee, which was indeed as strong as advertised. Well, you seem pretty worked up about what was basically a minor traffic accident. That suggests either your security is not as good as you think, or your leadership tends to overreact to unexpected situations. The alien officer looked like someone had just suggested that up might actually be down, and left could possibly be right. In 12,000 years of galactic history, no one had ever criticized the Empire's policies to Imperial officers' face. The very concept was so foreign that Krelthak's brain was struggling to process it. You are questioning the wisdom of the Eternal Empire. Jake leaned back in his chair and smiled, the easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble more times than he could count. I am not questioning anything. I am just making observations based on what I can see. You folks seem pretty stressed out about something that should be easy to fix. He gestured toward the window where they could see both human and alien crew members working together on various tasks that no one had specifically assigned, but everyone agreed needed doing. Tell me, do you actually like what you do? Being in the Empire military and following orders and maintaining the natural order and all that. The question hit Krelthak like a physical blow, because in his entire life, no one had ever asked him what he wanted or whether he enjoyed his work. The Empire assigned roles based on genetic markers and social algorithms, and the idea that someone might have personal preferences about their career was completely alien to their way of thinking. He sat there staring at Jake for a long moment, while his brain tried to process concepts it had never encountered before. Finally, he managed to speak, though his voice sounded uncertain and confused. I have never considered whether I like my duties. They are simply what I do because they are what I am assigned to do. Jake nodded as if this made perfect sense, though privately, he thought it sounded like the most depressing thing he had ever heard. Well, maybe you should think about it sometime. Life is pretty short even for long-lived species, and it seems like a waste to spend it doing things you do not enjoy. Word about the human ship spread through the Zephyrian fleet faster than their official communication systems could track. Within 6 hours, the New Horizon had become the most popular destination in the Imperial Navy, as aliens began inventing creative excuses to visit the strange vessel where beings apparently functioned without rigid hierarchical control structures or fear of punishment for independent thinking. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh found herself explaining human military organization to a group of increasingly bewildered alien officers who seemed unable to grasp the basic concepts she was describing. The group was led by Texawan, a reptilian being whose scales changed color based on his emotional state and were currently cycling through what the ship computer had identified as confused rainbow patterns. So your subordinates are actually allowed to disagree with your orders and suggest alternatives? Texawan asked, while his scales shifted to a deep purple that apparently meant intense concentration mixed with existential dread. Sarah laughed and nodded while refilling coffee cups for the mixed group gathered around the briefing room table. Not only are they allowed to disagree, they are expected to speak up if they think there is a better way to do something. Some of our best innovations come from enlisted personnel who see problems that officers miss. She gestured toward Specialist Ryan Johnson, who was quietly working on a console repair in the corner of the room. Just last week, Johnson figured out how to increase our shield efficiency by 15% using nothing but spare parts and creative thinking. Ryan looked up from his work and shrugged with the casual confidence that marked most human technical specialists. Oh, that thing. Yeah, I just tried reversing the polarity on the tertiary coupling and rerouting power through the secondary manifolds. It seemed pretty obvious once I thought about it for a while. The word obvious hit the alien officers like a physical blow, because in their culture, obvious solutions were usually the ones that had already been tried and approved by higher authorities. The idea that a low-ranking individual could see something that trained experts had missed was completely foreign to their way of thinking. Texwan scales had now shifted to a deep blue color that the computer translated as existential contemplation, mixed with mild panic. But what if your obvious solution had been wrong? What if it had damaged the ship or endangered the crew? Ryan considered this while gathering up his tools and preparing to move on to his next repair task. Then I would have learned something new and tried a different approach. That is how you figure things out. You try stuff and see what happens. In the engineering section, Chief Williams had accidentally started what could only be described as an impromptu technical university. Alien engineers from multiple ships were taking detailed notes as he explained human problem-solving methodology, using examples that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics and common sense. The key thing to remember is that the universe does not care what you think is impossible. Williams told his increasingly large audience of fascinated alien technicians. If you need something to work, you keep trying different approaches until something does work. And if it breaks along the way, well, that just gives you more information about what does not work. An elderly Zephyrian engineer named Qualbeth raised a mechanical tentacle that was covered in sensors and measuring devices. But what if the established scientific principles clearly state that your desired outcome cannot be achieved? What if centuries of research have proven that certain things are simply not possible? Williams grinned and gestured toward the quantum. Drive that was humming quietly in the corner and occasionally making sounds that seemed to violate the basic principles of audio engineering. Then the established scientific principles are probably incomplete or just plain wrong. Would not be the first time that happened in human history. He pulled up a holographic display showing the drive specifications and pointed to several components that were clearly labeled as theoretical impossibilities. Half the stuff on this ship should not work according to traditional physics, but it works fine because we built it anyway, and refused to accept that it could not be done. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison was receiving increasingly frantic communications from Zephyrian High Command as news of the situation continued to spread through their military hierarchy. Admiral Vexthor, the Supreme Commander of the Imperial Fleet, appeared on the main screen looking like someone who had been dealing with crisis management for several days without sleep. Captain Morrison, we have received disturbing reports that your crew is teaching our personnel to question direct orders and established protocols. Jake looked genuinely surprised by this accusation and glanced around the bridge where several alien officers were working alongside his crew on various projects that seemed to be benefiting everyone involved. Is that against your rules? We are just having normal conversations with people who seem interested in learning about different approaches to common problems. Admiral Vexthor's voice rose to a pitch that suggested he was reaching the limits of his patience and possibly his sanity. Conversations. You call them conversations. Subcommander Krelthak has submitted a formal request to transfer to your crew permanently. 3 of our most experienced engineers have asked to study human improvisation techniques. And your medical officer has somehow convinced our chief physician that mandatory rest periods actually improve overall performance, rather than indicating weakness. Jake considered this information while watching Dr. Clark explain proper sleep hygiene to a group of alien medical personnel who had apparently been working 18-hour shifts for their entire careers. Well, do mandatory rest periods improve performance? It seems like they probably would, since tired people make more mistakes and have trouble thinking clearly. The Admiral stared at him through the screen with the expression of someone who was beginning to question fundamental assumptions about reality itself. That is not the point, Captain Morrison. Jake tilted his head slightly and smiled in the way that usually meant he was about to ask a question that would make someone uncomfortable. Is it not, though? I mean, if something works better than the old way of doing things, why would you not want to try it? What is the point of having rules that make things worse instead of better? Admiral Vexthor opened his mouth to respond and then closed it again as he realized he did not actually have a good answer to that question. In 12,000 years of imperial military service, no one had ever asked him to justify the fundamental principles of their organizational structure, and he was discovering that many of those principles did not hold up well under casual examination. The silence stretched on for several long moments while the Admiral tried to think of a response that would restore his sense of certainty about the natural order of things. Finally, he managed to speak, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The Empire has maintained stability and order for 12 millennia using these established protocols. Jake nodded agreeably while making notes on a tablet that contained suggestions from various alien crew members about improvements to Imperial military procedures. That is certainly impressive. But stability and order are not the same thing as effectiveness and happiness. Maybe it is time to try some new approaches and see if you can do even better. By the end of the first week, the situation had developed far beyond anyone's ability to control or predict. The human ship had become the center of what future historians would call the accidental enlightenment as alien crew members returned to their vessels carrying dangerous ideas about personal agency, creative problem-solving, and the revolutionary concept that authority should be earned through competence rather than simply inherited through social position. Dr. Susan Clark was having the time of her life as she established what appeared to be the galaxy's first interspecies medical exchange program. Her sick bay had been converted into a combination research laboratory and informal classroom where beings from dozens of different worlds were sharing treatment techniques that had been developed in isolation for thousands of years. The truly fascinating thing is that every species we have encountered has developed unique solutions to medical problems that other species face. She explained to her mixed audience of human and alien medical personnel who were crowded around examination tables covered with unusual equipment and biological samples. She held up a small crystal that pulsed with soft blue light and seemed to generate its own gravitational field. These Vorthon healing crystals actually work exactly as advertised. They generate a specific electromagnetic frequency that promotes rapid cellular regeneration and tissue repair. We just never thought to try using controlled electromagnetic fields for medical treatment. Chief Medical Officer Zelnoth of the Imperial flagship had been taking detailed notes for hours, and his notebook was now filled with treatment protocols that violated everything he had been taught about proper medical procedures. But how did you determine the effectiveness of this treatment without proper authorization from the medical hierarchy and extensive testing protocols? Dr. Clark looked at him with the expression of someone who had just been asked why water was wet. Authorization for what? If someone is injured or sick, you try to help them using whatever tools and knowledge you have available. Everything else is just paperwork and bureaucracy. The concept of dismissing official procedures as just paperwork was causing philosophical earthquakes throughout the imperial medical establishment as word spread that effective treatments were being ignored because they had not been properly authorized by committees that met once every few years. Navigation had become particularly chaotic, as Amy Foster found herself teaching improvisational space travel to alien pilots who had never conceived of deviating from established shipping lanes and approved travel corridors. Her classroom was the ship's navigation center, where holographic star charts showed traditional routes alongside the creative shortcuts that human explorers had discovered through trial and error. But what happens if there is an emergency situation that requires rapid response? Asked Pilot Kexrin, a graceful being who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a professional dancer and given the result an advanced degree in mathematics. Amy pulled up a three-dimensional map showing the outer solar system and highlighted a path that seemed to go directly through an asteroid field that any sane navigator would avoid. Then you figure out the fastest way to get where you need to go, regardless of what the official procedures say. Last month, we had a medical emergency that required getting to the outer system as quickly as possible. The approved route would have taken 6 hours, but I found a path through this asteroid field that cut the travel time to 90 minutes. Kexrin compound eyes grew wide with what appeared to be a mixture of horror and fascination. You navigated through an asteroid field without proper clearance or safety protocols. The regulations clearly state that travel through unprescribed routes is strictly forbidden except in cases of extreme military emergency. Amy shrugged and highlighted several other unconventional routes that had saved time and resources during various human missions. The person having the medical emergency did not care about regulations. They needed help, and we got it to them as fast as possible. That seemed more important than following rules that were designed for situations that did not apply. This simple statement hit the alien pilot like a revelation, because for the first time in his life, he was confronting the idea that rules existed to serve people rather than the other way around. The concept was so foreign to his training that his mathematical mind began running calculations to determine the efficiency gains that could be achieved by prioritizing results over procedures. Captain Morrison was spending most of his time fielding increasingly desperate communications from various levels of Imperial leadership as the effects of human influence continued to spread through their military and civilian populations. The latest call came from Empress Zarathul herself, the supreme ruler of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire, and a being who had not been questioned or challenged in over 3,000 years. Captain Morrison, your presence in our space is causing significant disruptions to the established order. She began with a voice that carried the weight of absolute authority and 12 millennia of unquestioned rule. Jake looked at the screen where the Empress appeared as a tall, elegant figure, surrounded by holographic displays, showing the current status of her empire. Recent reports indicated that productivity was up 17% across multiple sectors, while citizen satisfaction surveys were showing results that had never been recorded in Imperial history. I am sorry to hear that, Your Majesty. Is there anything we can do to help you deal with whatever problems you are experiencing? The Empress paused for a long moment because in her entire reign, no one had ever offered to help her solve problems. The very concept of collaborative problem-solving was so foreign to Imperial culture that she was not sure how to respond to the suggestion. Help. You are offering to help me. Jake nodded and pulled up his own report showing the various projects that human and alien crew members were working on together. Sure, why not? We seem to be pretty good at figuring out solutions to complicated problems, and you obviously have some challenges that need addressing. Maybe we can work together and find some approaches that benefit everyone. For the next 2 hours, the supreme ruler of the galaxy found herself engaged in a detailed discussion about administrative efficiency and governance strategies with a human ship captain who treated her like a colleague rather than a divine authority figure. Jake listened to her concerns about maintaining order across thousands of worlds and offered suggestions based on human organizational theory and management techniques. The thing is, centralized control becomes less effective as the system gets larger, he explained while showing her organizational charts that demonstrated the benefits of distributed decision-making. You might get better results by giving local administrators more authority to solve problems without waiting for approval from the central government. The Empress studied the information with growing interest as she realized that many of the Empire's chronic problems could be addressed using approaches that had never been considered because they deviated from traditional Imperial structure. But how do you maintain unity and prevent chaos if individual regions are allowed to make independent decisions? Jake smiled and pulled up examples of successful human organizations that balanced central coordination with local autonomy. You establish clear goals and principles that everyone agrees on, and then let people figure out the best ways to achieve those goals in their specific situations. Most people want to do good work and help their communities. They just need the freedom to use their judgment and creativity. By the end of their conversation, the Empress had filled several notebooks with ideas that challenged everything she had been taught about effective leadership and governance. For the first time in 3 millennia, she was beginning to question whether the way things had always been done was necessarily the best way to do them. 3 months after the New Horizon had accidentally crashed into galactic politics, the Zephyrian Empire was still technically an empire, but it was rapidly transforming into something that had never existed before in the galaxy's recorded history. What had started as a rigid hierarchical structure based on fear and unquestioning obedience was becoming a voluntary association of worlds united by curiosity, cooperation, and the revolutionary idea that things could always be improved. The changes had started small with individual ship captains allowing their crews to suggest modifications to standard procedures. Planetary governors began asking their populations what they actually needed instead of simply implementing policies handed down from Imperial headquarters. Scientists started conducting experiments that had not been pre-approved by committees and discovered solutions to problems that had been considered unsolvable for centuries. Subcommander Krelthak, who was now serving as the first alien exchange officer aboard the New Horizon, was writing his weekly report to Imperial Command. His reports had become required reading throughout the fleet because they provided insight into human methodology that seemed to violate basic assumptions about how intelligent beings should behave. The humans continued to demonstrate their unusual approach to problem-solving and crisis management, he wrote while watching Engineer Williams repair a malfunctioning gravity generator, using what appeared to be a standard maintenance hammer and several creative applications of percussive engineering. Today, Williams fixed a critical system failure by hitting it with a tool until it started working properly. This approach should not be effective according to established repair protocols, but the results speak for themselves. He paused in his writing to watch Williams explain his technique to a group of alien engineers who were taking careful notes about the proper application of controlled impact therapy to stubborn mechanical systems. I am beginning to suspect that human success is based on their fundamental refusal to accept that success is impossible. When faced with obstacles, they simply find ways around them or through them without wasting time on theoretical limitations. Captain Morrison found himself in the strange position of being an unofficial ambassador to a galactic empire that was accidentally transforming itself through exposure to human attitudes and approaches. He was currently hosting a video conference with representatives from 47 different worlds, all of whom wanted advice about implementing what they called the human approach to governance and social organization. The thing you have to understand is that we do not really have a unified approach or system, he explained to the assembled alien leaders who were taking notes as if he was revealing the secrets of the universe. We just try things, and if they work, we keep doing them, and if they do not work, we try something different. The important part is that we ask people what they think, because they usually have pretty good ideas about what would make their lives better. Empress Zarathul, who had become a regular participant in these discussions, nodded thoughtfully while reviewing reports that showed dramatic improvements in citizen satisfaction and economic productivity across worlds that had implemented human-inspired reforms. This concept of asking people for their opinions continues to produce unexpected results. For 12,000 years, we have told our subjects what to think and how to behave. Morrison smiled and gestured toward the view screen where they could see ships from dozens of different species working together on projects that no central authority had authorized, but everyone agreed were beneficial. How has that been working out for you? The Empress considered the question while looking at reports showing that citizen happiness surveys were recording levels that had been considered theoretically impossible under traditional imperial management. Not as effectively as we had assumed, apparently. Meanwhile, the New Horizon had evolved into something that resembled a cross between a diplomatic embassy and a technical university. The ship's various departments had become informal centers of learning, where beings from across the galaxy came to study human approaches to everything from engineering to medicine to social organization. Chief Williams was running a galaxy-wide engineering exchange program through subspace communications networks that allowed technicians from hundreds of worlds to share solutions to common problems. His latest project involved coordinating repairs to a massive space station, using techniques that combined human improvisation with alien precision engineering. The beautiful thing about working with different species is that everyone brings unique perspectives to the same challenges, he explained to his current class of mixed human and alien engineers. What seems impossible to one group might be obvious to another group that approaches the problem from a different angle. Dr. Clark had established medical research partnerships with institutions on 43 different worlds and was developing new treatments by combining the best techniques from dozens of different healing traditions. Her latest breakthrough involved using Zephyrian bioregeneration technology with human surgical techniques to create a treatment protocol that was more effective than either approach used alone. The ship's mess hall had become a 24-hour diplomatic lounge where beings from across the galaxy gathered to argue, discuss, and share stories that would have been considered impossible just a few months earlier. The conversations ranged from technical discussions about faster-than-light travel to philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and freedom. Communications Officer Martinez had achieved what was perhaps the most remarkable feat of all by convincing the imperial bureaucracy to implement a suggestion box system that allowed citizens to propose improvements to government policies and procedures. The first suggestion had been maybe we should ask people before we make decisions that affect their lives, and the bureaucracy was still processing this radical concept, though early indicators suggested it might be approved sometime within the next few years. As Captain Morrison sat in his ready room looking out at a view that now included ships from 23 different species, all working together on projects that benefited everyone involved, he reflected on how much had changed since that Tuesday when they had accidentally crashed through a galactic customs checkpoint. The New Horizon was no longer just an exploration vessel, but had become the center of an informal network of worlds that were experimenting with the dangerous human concept of making things better just because they could. First Officer Rodriguez knocked and entered with a formal-looking document that bore the official seals of the Galactic Council. Captain, we have received an invitation from the restructured Imperial government. They are offering humanity full membership in what they are now calling the Galactic Cooperative, with voting rights and representation proportional to our contributions to overall prosperity and innovation. Morrison looked up from his reports and raised an eyebrow at the formal language. What is the catch, Rodriguez? She smiled and shook her head while settling into the chair across from his desk. No catch, sir. They are asking if we would be willing to keep doing exactly what we have been doing. Apparently, treating people like people and solving problems when we encounter them is working out well for everyone involved. Morrison considered this while watching a group of mixed-species engineers collaborate on improvements to faster-than-light communication systems that would benefit trade and cultural exchange throughout the galaxy. You mean accidentally causing revolutions by being ourselves? Rodriguez nodded and gestured toward the window where they could see the ongoing projects that had emerged from simple human curiosity and willingness to help. It seems that our natural tendency to question authority and improve things has created a more prosperous and happy galaxy than 12,000 years of rigid imperial control. Morrison smiled and turned back to his paperwork, which now included requests for assistance from hundreds of worlds that were implementing human-inspired reforms with remarkable success. Well, I suppose we can keep being ourselves. It is not like we know how to be anything else, and it seems to be working out pretty well for everyone. And in the vast galactic bureaucracy that was slowly learning to value effectiveness over tradition, the suggestion box system processed its 10,000th citizen proposal, while productivity continued to climb, and happiness surveys recorded numbers that would have been considered impossible under the old system. The revolution was complete, and most people still had not realized they had been part of one.